On today's episode of Composer Talks with White Bear PR, I am so happy to have Anne Nikitin. Hello, Anne, and hello from London.
Hi, Chandler. Hi to LA.
How is the UK treating you?
It's treating us very well, thank you. Despite lockdown, I am, locked in my studio. At least my studio is at home, which is
Oh, right,
good.
yeah, that is
Yeah.
good. That's very, very lucky. It looks beautiful. I like the little Buddha head behind you as
Oh,
well.
thank you. Buddha keeps me on track. Peace.
Well, for those of you tuning in, a little bit about Anne. She has worked with director Bart Layton on his BAFTA-winning film The Imposter and the critically acclaimed heist film American Animals. The film premiered at the Sundance Film Festival and was nominated for 11 British Independent Film Awards, including Best Score. And the score was also nominated for a Music and Sound Award and an Ivor Novello Award. Some of Anne's recent work includes the BBC Amazon Agatha Christie series The Pale Horse, and the documentaries Untouchable, The Rise and Fall of Harvey Weinstein, and Stardust, a movie about David Bowie's early career. Now, Anne, you're quite busy working on so many different genres, from award-winning films and television to documentaries. And earlier this year, you were back at the Sundance Film Festival with Lost Girls. How has Sundance impacted your career from American Animals until now?
Well, it's Sundance is a fantastic festival, and it's really, I think it's helped nurture my career. And actually, my first film that I had at Sundance was The Imposter, so also directed by Bart Layton. And I think that was a really important time for Bart, and then subsequently for me, because Sundance really gave that film a platform, and it suddenly sort of exploded after it got shown at Sundance. And after that, Sundance Institute really nurtured Bart's career. He went on the writing course with them, and then he came up with American Animals. And then that for me was also very positive, because he has obviously taken me with him, which is great. So I unfortunately couldn't go to Sundance during The Imposter because I just had a baby. He was a month old, and I was completely shell-shocked. So I missed that, but I made sure I went for American Animals. And I was really surprised at how much value they put on music at Sundance and composition. And, it's just packed with events for composers. You never feel like you're at a loss. ASCAP and BMI are brilliant at putting on little meet and greets, big parties. They have these events, the speed dating with directors, so composers can meet directors there. They have workshops, Q&As. It's basically non-stop. And I think it's really important for composers from all facets of their career to go to Sundance and, get something out of it. So,
Yeah, I mean, we get asked by young composers all the time about whether they should attend the Sundance Film Festival. I can speak words. I guess the next question, which you kind of answered, is what do you feel about people attending? Do you think that they need a film in order to go to the festival, or should they just go regardless?
I would say they should just go. I mean, it's never something I would have thought of doing had I not had a film there. But actually, you don't need a film there. And I met a lot of composers this time when I went with Lost Girls this January. There were a lot of young composers there who were there just to get a feel for things, to meet people, to be inspired, to be motivated. And I think it's really important for young composers to go to these events and see what's happening. And because it's independent film, people are really open to meeting young voices and young talents and collaborating with them. And I mean, I know that when I was a student, I used to love, one of the best things about my college was that they used to invite working composers every week or every 2 weeks to come and talk to us about what it was like to work in the film and TV industry. And I used to love those. They were so inspiring listening to those talks. I always felt motivated to go and write. And because Sundance has lots of wonderful Q&As with composers, I feel like young composers can really get inspired and motivated by being there in the room and watching that interaction, and then being able to speak with the composers afterwards as well. So yeah, no, I'd say it's definitely a great place to go. and I've been to quite a few festivals, and I haven't felt that, you know. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of my favorite festivals. And so I totally agree. I think it's great just to go. I have a lot of great experiences with composers telling me how they've met future collaborators and they've always come away with some sort of connection that has benefited their career. So, uh,
Yeah,
good
absolutely.
advice.
I met my US agent during the when I went with American Animals. Wonderful Patty.
Great.
I don't think I would have met her otherwise. So yeah, it's definitely been beneficial for me personally.
Excellent.
A
And
great
now,
part.
yes, of course.
And I got
Oh,
this. This is probably the best bit of Sundance is I got a lovely water bottle out of it.
yes, I love it. Yeah, annually you get an amazing water bottle from every Sundance. So if anything, go there and get the water bottle.
Yeah.
Um, Now, I mentioned earlier that you work in many different genres, sometimes at the same time. I was wondering, how is your approach to scoring for fictional characters versus real life people?
It's a question I get asked quite often, actually, and I must admit I don't think there's a difference. I personally take the same approach. I think for documentary, it's well for both. For documentary, it's also about storytelling, and it's also about getting into characters' heads and understanding what characters go through, what they're feeling, what are their motivations. It's about establishing the themes of the film and coming up with motifs and how and linking them together. And you know, I have the exact same conversations with directors in both genres. I think maybe the only slight difference with documentary would be there are a lot of talking heads in documentaries. So the more serious it gets, the more you kind of want to pull back with documentary music and let that happen. So once in a while, drones and things like that tend to work quite well in documentary when you just want to add a little bit of attention to what they're saying or support them. But that would be maybe the only difference. But no, I approach it in the same way. And in fact, in my early on in my career, I cut my teeth on drama docs, which were a hybrid,
Mm,
which are a hybrid of the genre. And working on actually Bart Layton's company would make these incredible drama docs, which were like mini action films, and yet there were documentaries. And so I found that was an amazing way to get into sort of action movie and still retain the documentary approach. So yeah, that was a really good learning curve for me.
and with these documentaries, such as the Mladic documentary and Weinstein, are you more cautious not to manipulate the viewers to kind of emotionally go with what you're feeling? Like, how do you balance that?
Yeah, I mean, especially for the melodic documentary, that was really quite a very serious, hard-hitting political observational documentary, almost a lot of courtroom eyewitness statements. And so I had to be really careful with that one, not to get in the way of these incredibly excruciating accounts that are all happening in court. So sometimes, especially there, the sound wasn't that great. You really had to tune into what they're saying. And so I would try and hold back on those and not have any score at all, which were ongoing conversations I had with the directors on that. And in some cases in the melodic, music was used almost as a relief tool because the testimonies were so hard hitting that, and they were silence, that suddenly they would finish and then you'd hear the music and it was almost like the viewer could breathe a sigh of relief that they were
Yes, absolutely.
taken out of those horrific moments. The Weinstein was not an ob doc, and we had talking heads speaking to camera with good quality sound and everything, and so I could be a little bit more creative on that one in terms of having music a little bit more to the foreground with that one. But again, it's picking your moments when to have the music support the talking head and just to sit back, and then when to bring the music to the foreground where it could be dramatic. But those are all conversations you have with the director and the editor as you go.
Yeah, I guess my follow-up question is how do you pick those moments? I know you said you talk with the director, but what are some of the conversations you've had internally that make you decide when melody is going to give the audience a relief.
Yeah.
You know, can you talk about any of those conversations?
Yeah, trying to think which film to talk about, but I suppose overall it's excuse me, I'll go into an edit suite and I'll ideally watch the film all the way through with the director, and then we discuss where music should go. So we spot the film together, and um, and so those are the moments when we'll choose together as a team where music will have to sit back and where it can go to the foreground. And then as you're writing as well, you get a sense of what's appropriate, what isn't. And I think it's a feeling, you know, it's a conversation with the director. It's also, there's a lot of logic to it when you're watching the film, but it's also a feeling you get as specifically a film composer as opposed to a composer, is when you're scoring a lot to picture, you just learn these things as you go, and you learn to feel when it's right and when it isn't right, and when music can sing and when it should stay back.
And do you find yourself speaking up in those moments where you're like, I really think music should be in this moment, or are you always taking direction from the director and waiting for their input?
I will. It's a combination of both. So I know that it's a collaborative um, project, writing music for film, and it is the director's baby ultimately. So they will always have first and final say. But in the middle, of course, I'm happy to voice my opinions, and a lot of directors are open to that and they want that conversation, because you know they've got to think of all sorts of facets to filmmaking, and music's just one element, and they might not be experts on music. Some of them know what they want, and others want a little bit more guidance and input. So those are just things that you learn along the way, and when you establish your relationships with these directors.
Right, of course. I'm sure you gain confidence through your career as well. Early
Yes,
on, you're a bit more like whatever you would like, director. And
totally.
then as you get more confident and you kind of hone
Yeah.
your skills some more, you kind of know what really works for your music and
No,
can
that's
kind of
absolutely true. Because at the beginning also you have to learn that to let go of your babies too, because you're so used to writing for yourself, and then suddenly you start to work with other people, and then you might think, God, I've just written my masterpiece, and then you play it to the director and they'll go, yeah, I'm not quite feeling it, and you're going, okay, that's fine, and inside you're crying. But you know, and in the early days, you're right, I would have just said, you know, yeah, you're right, I'll do something different. Whereas now I might try and argue the case a little bit, but then I know when to pull back.
right, of course. Now, you also composed a documentary on David Bowie called Stardust, which I'm a huge fan of David Bowie. And I was curious in this film, which has yet to come out, so I haven't seen anything from it yet. So I'm very curious to see it. But on your score, were you inspired by David Bowie's music at the time, or did you keep it more to your own,
So
your own
it's
style?
actually narrative feature. It's not a documentary. Did you say
Ah,
it's a
okay.
documentary? Oh yeah, you did. Yeah, so it stars Johnny Flynn, who plays David Bowie, and that was a really interesting film to do, because the film doesn't use David Bowie's music in it. So we had this challenge of creating a Bowie-esque world without pastiching Bowie. I mean, that was one thing we really did not want to do, because it just would have been awful to try and sound like a Bowie pastiche. So I worked quite intimately with the director and Johnny Flynn, discussing what kind of sound we were going to have for this film. Johnny's a musician himself, you know, an incredibly talented. I can't speak. He's an incredibly talented musician as well as actor. So he came over here to discuss what kind of music the film should have, and then also to help me write some of the themes. And we spent a day in my studio, and we listened to a lot of Bowie, especially the early stuff around the period when the film takes place. And we sort of grabbed little bits of what Bowie would have done. So say Bowie used a lot of acoustic guitar and electric guitar, and then he would pan them in opposite ways, and he had a specific drum sound and specific way of singing. You know, he had crazy vocal lines. And so Johnny and I just sort of grabbed those ideas and then we came up with our own things. So Johnny would just play some stuff. I'd say, that sounds great. Why don't you try it a bit like this? And then he'd do that. So we spent a day doing that. And then after he left, I created the themes from what we had and then kind of deconstructed them and added my own bits, my own modern synths and my own interpretation, guitar interpretations. And so it's a real hybrid. So it's harking back to that era, but not pastiching it.
Right, yeah. And that must be an exciting part of your career overall, is to be able to play in different musical genres and
Yeah.
you know, to have that sort of challenge of how do you digest David Bowie's music at that time and then turn it into a sound palette that is not ripping off David Bowie.
Yeah, I was really actually nervous about this film because yeah, it was exactly that. You don't want to be ripping anyone off. You don't want to be pastiching it because it's just going to sound silly. And the 70s wasn't really my forte. I was more of a 90s chick. And so if someone said, you know, write 90s music, I could do that really easily. But the 70s, I really had to listen to a lot of it and get it into my head and just, yeah, get a feel for it. So yeah, but it was really fun and challenging. Nice to do something different.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, last summer, you were part of a concert series called Compose Her, which I had the joy of being in the audience. And you had a piece of yours performed from Miss Wilson, I believe. And I was curious, do you think that events such as Compose Her are important? And what advice would you give to young women who are looking to become a composer?
I thought that concert was really important and I'd love to see more of them. There were a lot of young women who came up to me afterwards and said they were inspired by it, young women composers. And well, I think that's because there aren't very many women composers being performed really in both avant-garde music, classical music and film music. Until now, it's starting to happen. But certainly when I was growing up, I never saw live music by a woman composer. And so I think it was really important for young women to see that this is a viable career option if they want to do it. And just to go home and feel motivated and to write music and to try it out. So yeah, I thought it was important. And I can't remember the second part of your question. Oh, well, about young women composers.
Yeah, what advice would you give them?
I would advise them just to keep writing and write all the time, and yeah, don't give up. Keep going.
Good advice, yeah. Well, thank you so.
As well. Sorry, that was one thing I lacked as well. I was really lacking in confidence when I first started, and I think that's quite typical of women, I'm afraid to say, because when I speak to my fellow composers about that, we all sort of say the same thing. So I'd advise women not to be meek. Just go for it. Things are changing too, so they will get a very good look in as well.
Good, good. Well, thank you so much for taking your time and speaking with me today. And for those of you interested in more Composer Talks with White Bear PR, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you again.
Thank you for having me.